Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Secretary, Ministry of Defence and Urban Development, General Jagat Jayasuriya, Chief of Defence Staff, Commander of the Army, Commander of the Navy, Commander of the Air Force, Director General of the Civil Defence Force, former commanders of the Army, the senior officials of the government, senior officers of the three forces, distinguished invitees, distinguished Member of Parliament, and also Professor Rohan Gunaratna and Mr. Arun Thambumuthu, and friends. Well, having listened to such an eloquent speaker, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, sometimes I am wondering what I should be saying. But I think he left a little window of opportunity for me to probably elaborate on a few things that the government has been doing since May 2009. But let me also say that I consider this a great honor and a privilege to be invited for the second consecutive occasion to speak at the Defence Seminar, which has now become one of the most looked forward to events in the calendar of defence and security professionals, both in Sri Lanka and in the region. It has earned the reputation of being an important academic event as well. So congratulations to the Commander of the Army and his officers for organizing this so well. Well, of course, we had the privilege of attending the former ones when General Jagat Jayasuriya commanded the army. He, on the instructions of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, was instrumental in getting this going. I'm sure this will become a forum in years to come where even development issues, which may not be quite the job of the army, but certainly where the army is very much concerned, I'm sure this will be a forum for us to discuss some of these difficult themes and issues in years to come. The chosen theme for this year's seminar is Post-Conflict Sri Lanka, Challenges and Regional Stability. 4 years after the end of nation's struggle against terrorism, this theme remains very much relevant and important today. Countries undergoing post-conflict development, such as Sri Lanka, encounter unique challenges as well as many opportunities. Some of these were elaborated by our eminent speaker, the keynote speaker, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But too many activities have to be carried out simultaneously, such as relief, resettlement, reconstruction, economic revival, promoting investment, political consensus building, establishing an inclusive society, social cohesion, holding elections, and enhancing delivery of public services. These are some of the challenges that the government faces. But interestingly, many people expect these things to happen simultaneously and in a very short period of time. And most of the time, the government has been saying and asking the international community, look, show us a parallel elsewhere in the world. Show us precedents. Tell us examples of where many things have happened in such a short time. But I don't think none of those queries have been properly answered. Well, for a country set to face the challenges of post-conflict development, all of these are competing priorities. You can't say one is more prioritized than the other. All are priorities. Hence, must be exceptionally facilitated. In Sri Lanka, many of these challenges are being successfully dealt with by the government, as you heard from Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and in some areas without any parallel elsewhere in the world. Well, what is uppermost in the thinking of the government is to expedite the process of implementation so that we gain benefits in the shortest possible time frame. That's a challenge, certainly. Well, the invitation to me from the organizers of the defense seminar requests me to address you on a particular topic, the LLRC, the much talked of LLRC, and the way forward. Perhaps prompted by my role as the chairman of the committee monitoring the implementation of LLRC recommendations. It is certainly an exercise I carry out with relish, as LLRC is our own homegrown reconciliation mechanism. The government has been telling the whole world that there is nothing foreign that can help us. What can help us is our own indigenous solution or indigenous mechanisms. So here we have the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, and I think it would be appropriate if I start with a brief mention of the beginnings of the LLRC, just to put everybody on a level playing field, so that some who are not conversant with this subject will gain an understanding of the background. On May 15, 2010, His Excellency Mahinda Rajapaksa appointed the Commission on Lessons Learned and Reconciliation under the Commissions of Inquiry Act to support the drive towards national unity and reconciliation after several decades of division. The 8 members selected for appointment to this commission by His Excellency were all individuals reputed for their integrity and eminence. They also represented all ethnicities in the country. The proclamation mandated the commissioners to inquire into and report on the matters that may have taken place during the period between February 21, 2002 and May 19, 2009, a matter of 7 years. In the proclamation, His Excellency the President noted that, let me quote, "An opportune moment has arrived to reflect on the conflict phase and the sufferings the country has gone through as a whole during this period," unquote. His Excellency also noted that, let me quote again, "It has become necessary to learn from this recent history lessons that would ensure that there will be no recurrence of any internecine conflict in the future," unquote. The Commission's work had been thorough and exhaustive. It had made special efforts to reach out to the public, particularly from the conflict-affected areas, to encourage them to make written and oral representations to the Commission. It also had undertaken a number of field visits to affected areas to conduct public sittings in order to ascertain firsthand the ground realities. This is the first time a commission at that level, of that stature, went out of Colombo to meet those who really wanted to make representations. So there was free access, unfettered access to people who wanted to come and make a presentation to the Commission, maybe place their grievances. That undoubtedly was history. So I think we need to really mark this as something substantially important in the work that the government has been doing post-conflict. Among those who made representations were private citizens, public servants, including those who served in the affected areas during the conflict period, affected persons, representatives of armed forces, political and religious leaders, academics, journalists, other professionals, civil society members, ex-LTT cadres, and former members of other armed groups. So that was the array of people who were able to, at least had the opportunity to make representations, or written or oral, to the Commission. There was so much public interest generated through media coverage that the Commission decided to extend its hearings to accommodate an increasing flow of persons wishing to be heard before the Commission. So subsequently, extensions were given by His Excellency the President, and the final report of the Commission was handed over to His Excellency on the 15th of November 2011. As you know, the Commission report, when it finally came out, was widely hailed for its credibility, objectivity, and transparency. The report of the LLRC contained many far-reaching recommendations to assure an effective reconciliation process and a mechanism to address victims' grievances. It is this domestic mechanism that has now been actioned through the National Plan of Action by the Cabinet appointed monitoring committee chaired by me. The National Plan of Action originally started with the implementation of 91 LLRC recommendations. I'm sure this is on the website, but just to make sure that people are aware that a report of two volumes and chapter 9 of this report contains 285 recommendations, but there are some overlapping recommendations as well. These recommendations, originally, we took 91 LLRC recommendations to be monitored for implementation. But finally, His Excellency wanted us to incorporate it all, and we have 144 recommendations categorized under 5 broad themes as follows. Let me just list it out for you. There are international humanitarian law issues, and in this category, we have 7 recommendations. On human rights, 56 recommendations. Land return and resettlement, 22 recommendations. Restitution, compensatory relief, 7 recommendations. And on reconciliation, which I think is probably the most important, forward-looking, far-reaching, with a futuristic kind of vision, we have 52 recommendations under that category. A significant number of these recommendations, I am happy to say, are well on their way towards completion or have already been completed. This is because even before the LLRC had commenced sittings, several government ministries had already initiated their own programs to address post-conflict needs or reconciliation matters. So it is correct to say that there had already been a head start by some government agencies. But what they were lacking were the crucial financial resources to implement most of these programs until the 2013 budget. By the time the report was handed over to His Excellency the President in 2011, the budget for 2012 had been passed by Parliament. So many ministries, many departments who were responsible for implementing did not have a particular vote or a particular budget item so that they could go on with the recommendations. But in 2013, His Excellency the President provided almost 1 billion rupees for the implementation of these recommendations. Some of the recommendations in the LLRC, by their very nature, require political consensus. Thus, they are now matters taken up by the Parliamentary Select Committee. As you probably may know, there is a Parliamentary Select Committee, and the government has been asking all political parties in Parliament to ensure that their representation is available on this PSC. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that kind of active participation from most opposition parties. With regard to a few others, the committee felt that they warranted a comprehensive assessment prior to implementation. Some recommendations, such as those relating to land matters, very contentious, very complicated. Those contain activities that can only be fully implemented over a lengthy time in the natural course of things. So one may well expect not to see clear final outcomes in quick time for a number of these recommendations. That's how some of these things need to be implemented. That's why the government has always been asking, let there be time and space for us to ensure that there is comprehensive implementation on some of these recommendations. It is important that while the government is pursuing the implementation process in full sincerity, that a measure of patience is exercised to see the full implementation of some of the recommendations. As I said earlier, quite a number of recommendations in the LLRC had already been given effect to by various government agencies. But we are now taking the LLRC forward as our domestic mechanism of reconciliation by making it an integral part of ministry action plans and government budget. The most recent significant achievement we made was the appointment of a commission of inquiry to investigate allegations of disappearances or abductions during the period June 10, 1990 to May 19, 2019, the day the government, the nation was able to defeat terrorism. So it's a long period of about 19 years that we are looking at. Of the 3 commission members appointed by the President, the chairman is a highly respected former High Court judge and also had the distinction of serving as a commissioner in the LLRC. While the LLRC covers the range of its recommendations under 5 different themes, which I just placed before you, its underlying theme is to foster reconciliation among all communities. And what I consider as one of the crucially important outcomes of the entire LLRC mechanism is that it has made us seriously think about developing new mechanisms to promote reconciliation. In this process, the government has been able to reach out to marginalized groups or vulnerable sections in the society as has never been done in the country's past. Take a small example. The plantation community in Sri Lanka has more or less been an isolated sector, and there has been little interaction between the public officers and the estate communities in the past. Since recent times, the public officers have actively engaged in estate communities in seeking out their physical and social well-being. I'm just taking an example only. There is now an interministerial coordination mechanism to look into the education, health aspects of these communities as well. The awareness for a compelling need to promote ethnic harmony and reconciliation has also led to crafting of new policies, such as the policy to create a trilingual society by 2022, national policy framework for social integration, and a more vigorous focus to implement the official language policy in all 72 bilingual divisions by year 2015. Once again, let me explain this a little bit. There are 330 administrative divisions in this country, each one being called a divisional secretariat. Of this, 72 divisions are of a bilingual nature. So the need to ensure that people are able to work in both languages, the both national languages. Taking cognizance that language plays an important role in national harmony and social integrity, the 10-year plan to create a trilingual Sri Lankan nation by 2022 is being aggressively pursued by several ministries and agencies, with leadership provided by a presidential task force. This program envisages providing trilingual skills to all school children to create a trilingual next generation, providing trilingual skills to the 1.3 million government officers, and providing trilingual skills to the general public. A very interesting newspaper report this morning, I might as well share this with you, comes from the police, issued by the police headquarters. The police headquarters said yesterday that policemen appointed to northern and eastern provinces will have to pay rupees 75,000 in case they failed the Tamil language examination in the 3 opportunities given to them. Some 700 policemen are expected to be transferred to northern and eastern provinces. Police department states that it was essential for them to learn Tamil to serve the people in the provinces, and if they want to become permanent in their service. The rupees 75,000 is the investment made by the department to train each policeman. Let me share this with you. This is probably the first time that the government is so hard on the public servants, asking them to be accountable for the money that the government has invested in them for their training. I think this is a very salutary move. It's a good move so that compelling public servants to ensure that they are able to use both national languages. In fact, the number of programs and activities undertaken by the Ministry of Education, Ministry of National Languages and Social Integration, and the Presidential Task Force to break down language barriers is too numerous to mention in this short spell of time, so I'm not going to try that. But just to give a brief example of the degree of importance accorded to language by the government, the Cabinet of Ministers will refuse to entertain any cabinet paper submitted by a minister that does not contain the Sinhala and Tamil versions of the contents. There is particularly one minister, Mr. Vasudeva Nanakar, Minister of Social Integration, who will refuse to sit in cabinet if a cabinet memorandum is presented in either Sinhala or in English or in both. You have to have the Tamil version as well. To that extent, the government is very keen to ensure that this bilingual nature is being given effect to. This is a clear message to all public officers that they must take serious note of language requirements. And we believe this bridge between communities can be strengthened, particularly by these language mechanisms. If you don't know the language of the other, how do you communicate? You go to a foreign country, you don't know that language, what do? You will have to use sign language, obviously. But that also creates a lot of suspicion, lot of maybe people try to think, okay, what is he trying to do? So these language mechanisms are extremely important in our context. The northern and eastern provinces have also shown significant economic growth since the end of the conflict. Public investment continues to be diverted to northern and eastern provinces for road construction. You saw it in Mr. Rajapaksa's presentation, power generation and transmission, port development and extension of railway lines, etc. The new Oliville harbour in the east will pave the way for a bustle of economic activity for all the communities. In 2 weeks from now, His Excellency will commission the new electricity substation in Jaffna that will light up 120,000 Jaffna households. Incidentally, the occasion will also mark the reconnection of the north to the national grid after 26 years through this particular power station. Also in 2 weeks, the public will be able to hop on a train to ply the route from Colombo to Kilinochchi on the reconstructed northern rail track, which was abandoned due to LTT activity during the past 2 decades. Just to place on record, nearly 240 kilometers of railway was totally dismantled by the LTT, and that was the main conveying, the main mode of conveyance for the people in the north to get to cities in the south. This has been not operative for the nearly last 2 decades. Very soon, the railway department will be operating 3 trains from Colombo to Kilinochchi daily, which is certainly going to be a very significant change in the lives of the people in the north. There is much hope for a strong revival of tourism as well, and the government is confident of achieving its 1.5 million tourist arrivals by the end of this year. Let me also briefly mention a few other key areas where the government has shown remarkable progress on. Demining certainly comes to my mind as the most important area. After carrying out detailed surveys at the end of the conflict, the government found that thousands of square kilometers land in the northern and eastern parts of the country was contaminated with landmines, making the area uninhabitable and delaying the resettlement process of the people. The international community kept on saying resettle these people, but forgetting the fact that these areas were certainly not safe for people to go and live. So the demining had to take place. The demining process started in August 2009 by the Sri Lanka Army with 6 NGOs. After their efforts, the hazardous area has now dwindled to only about 5% of the original area, which is mostly jungle area. What is noteworthy in this effort is that 85% of this area was cleared by the Sri Lanka Army, and I congratulate for a task which is very risky, which they undertook. I am privy to 2 instances which I think I should share with you. His Excellency the President met a group of deminers from NGOs, and some of them are from Scandinavian countries. And he asked them very pointedly, how long do you think this whole process will take to demine this area? They replied, he said, Mr. President, it might take somewhere between 12 to 15 years. Now that was in 2008. So you can just imagine the risk taken by the Sri Lankan Army. The second instance is when the railway was to be re-established. The contract was undertaken by a Government of India company, ERCON. They simply said, unless this whole thing is cleared of mines, and we asked, what do you mean by this whole thing? They said, at least 500 meters this way, 500 meters that way. So you need 1 kilometer, a track along 240 kilometers of railway to be cleared, 240 square kilometers, in short. That's the kind of risk that the army took. And the army said, let's do it. And they did it. And that's why you see the rail lines today. So once again, congratulations, and I think on behalf of the nation, we must thank the Sri Lanka Army for this activity of great risk. Resettlement. Once again, much elaborated by Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. we see this as the best possible solution to resolve land issues in the north and in the east. The Land Commissioner General's Department is operationalizing a special accelerated program in these two provinces. Land laws in this country, as in many other countries, are complicated, time consuming, needs very careful examining because there is legal background to some of the land issues. There is the laws of inheritance. You need to ensure that the right person is being given the land. Now, I think, once again, just to elaborate on what Mr. Rajapaksa said, there were these lands grabbed by the LTT and given to, the land belonged to A, the LTT grabs the land from A and gives it to B. Many years later, that is now, the original owner, A, returns to Sri Lanka or returns to this part of the country and claims that land. Now, there is this huge issue of documentation being burnt, documentation not available with these people. The government will have to sit down and very carefully think, plan and see, check, examine, so that there won't be post-legal issues, ensure that it is given to the right person. So you have to go through a rigorous procedure. That is why land resettlement takes a period of time. Retired public officers have been brought into service because we don't have people who are able to communicate in the language of the people in those areas. Landless people are being provided new land. Budgetary provision has been made available to adequately compensate people whose lands are acquired. I think we can safely say that the land issues in the north and the east will be resolved within the next 3 years. This is an undertaking I get from the Department of the Land Commissioner General. Education is a very interesting area, another area that the government has done extremely well. There had been only 617 functional schools in the northern province prior to the conflict. By now, there are 1,072 schools that are open with a student population of 260,000 and the teacher population with 14,000. The government, during its infrastructure development program, took action to rehabilitate almost all the schools that were damaged. Most schools were roofless. It is a known fact that many other schools, particularly in Kilinochchi, Mullaitivu and Mana districts, were for a long time occupied by the LTT to accommodate their cadres. Over rupees 1.3 billion had been spent for rehabilitation for schools, for which UNICEF and NGOs too contributed considerably. Most schools are now well equipped. It can in fact now be said that the entire education system in the northern province is now functioning better than before. I am only placing before you some of the major achievements we have had particularly during the last 1.5 years. Once the LLRC made their recommendations, we wanted to ensure that it's given effect to. In fact, all the work that we do is on this particular website, www.llrcaction.gov.lk. That has a very updated kind of version of the work that the National Plan of Action is expected to do. There are also many initiatives the government has taken to bring back normalcy to the people in the former theatre of conflict. These were done going beyond the LLRC recommendations. Let me just quote a few. The Cabinet of Ministers, having observed that the dearth of Tamil conversant officers in the northern and eastern provinces and that it impeded the implementation of accelerated post-conflict development programs and decreased the efficiency of public service delivery, decided as a matter of policy that special measures should be devised to recruit officers to such posts. It is pertinent to note that these measures have actually gone beyond the recommendations of the LLRC in ensuring that certain cadres are brought into the public service. And the services that benefited out of this decision by the Cabinet are the main civil services of the government, which are also all island services dealing with agriculture, ensuring accounts in government, ensuring engineering services, and certainly the police service. Well, I think that's one of those areas which the government was able to do. Then let me also take another. The cabinet also granted approval to make it mandatory for new entrants to universities from 1st January 2014 to take part in an official languages proficiency course conducted for a duration of at least 100 hours prior to the commencement of their respective degree courses. So we want to ensure that those who get into the higher education institutes under the government are also able to have an understanding and an awareness of the other language, their mother tongue and the other national languages, so that they are able to use it in employment once they come out of their degree courses. The cabinet also decided that the official languages proficiency requirement, which is currently applicable to the public service, to the officers who enter the service in public corporations, statutory boards, state banks, fully government-owned companies, who will join the public service on or after the 1st July 2013 must have proficiency in the other language. So these are some of the very important measures that the government has done or taken to ensure that reconciliation is a reality, that we make sure that this country's post-conflict era is something to look forward to, something that will give promise. As Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa very clearly said, we don't want to have what we went through again in this country. But education is important. Let me therefore just maybe clarify one point Mr. Rajapaksa came out with. How do we ensure that this is done? In order to make sure that the government does focus on education, let me quote from the LLRC report one particular recommendation which I think is relevant today. It's actually in chapter 9, recommendation 254. It says, mutual understanding and appreciation of the rich cultural diversity of different communities should be inculcated in the minds of school children and youth, so that the process of reconciliation takes firm root in the social fabric of the country. The Commission therefore recommends that every encouragement be given to create greater interaction among students through mechanisms such as twinning of schools from the different provinces, student exchange programs, and formation of reconciliation clubs in schools. In addition, the National Youth Council should adopt more intensive exchange programs at the youth level. Just about 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Education presented to Parliament the new education proposals, which I think is very relevant again in the context of what we are talking today. I'm just going to place before you 4 main objectives of education in Sri Lanka in the years to come. They had made 6 recommendations, but 4 are very relevant to what we are talking about today. It says, let me quote, to produce a citizen with self-confidence who will be imbibed with national, religious and cultural value systems and who will also love his motherland. This is extremely important, that we bring out children who love their motherland. To produce a citizen replete with core human values and who will appreciate religious and ethnic pluralism, national harmony, unity and reconciliation. Let me tell you that this is the first time that any education program in this country is focusing particularly on ethnic pluralism, national harmony, unity and reconciliation. It wants to inculcate in the child a sense of national harmony. To produce a wholesome, contented, balanced and liberal citizen with democratic values who will also be adaptable to constant changes. To produce creative leaders, entrepreneurs, leaders and contributors to development who can be active stakeholders in personal and national economic development. Just 4 of the 6 objectives of the new education proposals. I think in conclusion, I wish to place before you that the work, the task force of the National Action Plan monitoring the recommendations of the LLRC is very active and also ensures that there is communication between among 24 ministries and one department being the Department of the Attorney General. That's the scope of the stakeholders. We will also ensure that the time frames that are set in the National Plan of Action for each activity, there is a time frame given, that we will ensure that this is adhered to. And finally, we would report to the Cabinet the progress of the LLRC recommendations, and I am sure what Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa envisaged for a new Sri Lanka, a Sri Lanka where there is ethnic pluralism, religious pluralism, and also where there is harmony and reconciliation as its uppermost characteristics, will someday be a reality. And I think it's not long before we will see a Sri Lanka which will ensure that there is great harmony and national unity among all the ethnic communities living here. Thank you very much.